Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Eight Brocades and the Longevity Methods of Leaching Yuan course. This is Module 1, Session 1. We are going to be talking today about the fundamentals of longevity. Stuart is going to speak about the three treasures more in depth, especially as it pertains to how you use the development of the three treasures to reverse the aging process through internal alchemy. And then he's going to talk about these fundamental longevity practices of leaching Yuan, walking like a crane, sleeping like a deer, and sitting like a tortoise. And then we're going to take a break, and then just a short, quick body break. And then we're going to come back a few minutes later, and Stuart's going to talk about the first two brocades and a little bit of the background, the benefits, and the internal aspects of the first two brocades. And then Patrick is going to guide us through a practice of those first two brocades, and he's going to instruct and give us, more guidance about each of those practices, and then we're going to go through it together. So, and then there will be time for question and answer after Stuart speaks, and then during the process of learning the two brocade practices. So, with that said, and I would love it if anybody wants to put in the chat just like introducing yourself and sort of what you're hoping to get out of the course, or just anything about yourself that you'd like to share. We would love to know who's here and know how we can serve you better. So that would be awesome too. All right, with that, we'll introduce Stuart. And so Stuart Albiolson will be speaking with us today on these subjects. So here he is. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Well, let's begin this journey. And how I would like to start this is to give you kind of a more in-depth look at what it is that's actually going on when you talk about eight brocades and these different Qigong and, internal arts that you read about and hear about. Let me break this down for you first of all. Is that in our body, we have an energy called Jing. We also have an energy called Qi. And we have an energy called Shan. But let me break these down for you so you have a clear understanding. Jing is in essence our body. And a thing about that is that our body, like the earth, it is almost completely water. If you took the water elements out of our body, we would be nothing more than just skin and bone. So the water element of our body becomes really, really important. Moving ahead just a little bit here, Qi we can look at as our fire element, water and fire coming together. We'll get more into that later on, but let me first go through Jing. Now, as you'll see in Eight Brocades, there's a kind of an accentuation on the idea of producing saliva. And saliva is like the number one fluid, according to Taoists, that we try to cultivate. At least, blood is also important, but we're doing that through breathing. Saliva takes, a more concerted effort, when we start talking about swirling the tongue, etc. Now, saliva is really, really important. And one of the reasons is anybody who has been a parent and has held their infant on their shoulder knows that your clothes are going to get soaked with saliva in just a few seconds. Infants produce a great deal of saliva. And in fact, they're starting now to think that saliva is actually more important than mother's milk. Not that mother's milk should be done with. It's a question that infants produce a great deal of saliva because of the certain nutrients in it, and also because it is kind of, in many ways, like the oil of our body. So Taoism pays a great deal of attention to this stirring of the saliva, the swallowing of it, etc. It's a very important component. And that's what these, when you first, when getting into Taoism, like the Jade Emperor's Mind Seal Classic, which is all about these three treasures. He basically comes out right away and says the Qing, Qi, and Shun, these are the three components of a human being. And they are like the medicines for a human being. So you can look at these three treasures as your body, that's the Jing. You can look at the Qi as your breath and your energy. And then your Shun is your spirit and consciousness. So if you kind of look at these three, what we're seeing is that the Jing, which again gives us our body, our Qi is what animates that body and gives it energy. I can raise my hand up because of my Qi. If I didn't have Qi, I couldn't raise my hand up. My Shun, my spirit, my consciousness, is what makes this body aware. So I can go through life and discern things, I can talk about things, etc. That is my Shun. So these three components, as Taoists viewed it, are really what make us a human being. So when we start breaking these apart, let's first look at Jing. Our body is full of different fluids. We have saliva, we have blood, we have sexual secretions, we have tears, we have sweat, we have different hormones, we have bone marrow, we have brain marrow. All these different things and are kind of what we'll call the watery elements of our body. And they have to be cultivated. In Taoism, Jing is the first that we first start attempting to cultivate. I mean, we know that we need good blood circulation, and all the fluids of our body actually need to function well throughout our life if we're going to be healthy. So let's just look at this from, Taoism. I consider the great observers. And one of the things that is occurring here is that as you age, as you get older, your body starts actually to dry up. That's why the skin wrinkles, loss of hair, etc., loss of sexual vitality. All of these things happen because the fluids are starting to dry up. And this drying effect is basically aging. So Taoists were very focused on the idea that they wanted to keep the fluids of their body functioning at an optimal level. So the blood circulation had to be good, saliva had to be good. They would do things with like concentration to get the eyes to tear, and different exercises to make sure the body would sweat, different states of consciousness, we just say meditation here for the moment, to get different hormones, rare hormones released in our body. But let me do something here that a lot of people kind of miss about why do you do things like Eight Brocades and Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong, et cetera, et cetera. And my teacher explained this to me really well, in the sense that what we're doing is we are increasing our blood circulation through breathing with body movement. And this is really important, that when you're doing these exercises, you are breathing in connection with the movements you're doing. This then starts to make our breath warm. Okay, many of you who live in colder climates know that in the dead of winter, you can breathe into the palms of your hands and produce heat. So it shows that the breath is hot. But through these methods, the breath becomes even a little bit hotter. So what this does is, as we produce this heat from our breath, we start heating and warming our blood, so that the blood flows more efficiently. Heated water moves, cold water does not. So it's, kind of a simplistic idea here, is that the more heat we generate in our body, the greater our blood circulation is going to be. Now, this blood circulation, as it goes on, we continue practicing over a period of time. This new warm blood is not only creating new blood cells that are going to make us healthier, it starts to penetrate the muscles, the tendons, the sinews in our body, making our muscles, the fleshy part of our body, so to speak, much more youthful. Let's put it that way for the moment. And that we feel a strength in them. When they're full of blood and they're moving, being exercised, they all start to feel good. But now, in these arts, one of the things that's happening is, through continued practice, this heat is penetrating into these muscles, sinews, and tendons, and that starts affecting the marrow, the bone. It penetrates into the bone, and as it heats the bone, it starts to produce more marrow. This is really crucial, because we know, in present day, that marrow is really kind of the essence of your health. We're just talking bone marrow here, not brain marrow yet, but bone marrow. If it is restored and kept moist, so to speak, we have greater pliability in our bones, and we have greater health. Bone marrow, as we age, starts to dry up and deteriorate. So just to give you in ancient China, there's all these different, whether it's Buddhism or Taoism, there are these methods of what they call cleansing marrow. It's interesting that here, 1,200 to 2,000 years ago, they're talking about marrow cleansing, about producing more marrow in the body. Now, this is just something that's interesting, kind of a sidebar. It was a few years ago that a French doctor was treating two AIDS patients. And in both cases, he went through and performed a marrow transplant on them. And after the transplants were done, neither one had the infection anymore. It was gone. Now, I'm not making any bold statement here, but this French doctor was very adamant about that this may be the actual cure, is the idea of, regenerating marrow in the body. Now, ancients in China knew this anyway, that the whole key to all of this was changing and cleansing our bone marrow. And this is exactly one of the things that Tai Chi Chuan, Eight Brocades, various Qigong exercises are doing, is we are heating our body through breath, increasing our blood circulation, affecting our muscles and sinews and tendons, and then letting that heat penetrate our bone, which then is reproducing and restoring bone marrow. And this is really the whole kind of aspect of Jing. Now, we can look at Taoism, in a big overview, and we can see all sorts of different practices one could take on to increase this idea of cultivating our bodily fluids. And that's everything from doing Tai Chi to even, different sexual exercises that, because, and I want to make this clear so people don't misconstrue it. To the Taoist, you don't engage necessarily in sexual practices to be more sexual. It had to do with increasing the level of Jing in the body. See, it's through our life, just state this very quickly here. Men dissipate their Jing through sexual dissipation. Women dissipate their sexual vitality through the menstrual flow. So each one has these kind of practices that are meant to increase this kind of sexual vitality in the body through conservation. And through this, we start regaining this sexual vitality that we had when we were young. When you were 13 or 14, it was at its peak. And we could, again, just little things, we could get out of bed without, straining ourselves. We could just hop out of bed. These are all signs of a, really good Jing. And so as we go through life, we dissipate this Jing. We dissipate it in not only sexually, but we dissipate it through not paying attention, and most importantly, to blood circulation. It's kind of like in the West here, arthritis is, one of our main diseases. And in Asia, it's not as common. And the reason for that is that the Asians have, for the most part, learned to do exercise through, breathing with body movement. All you have to do when you're in China is wake up in the morning, go to any park, and you'll see hundreds and hundreds of people doing exactly this. You won't find that here in the West. And the idea is, arthritis, our cure for it in the West is to give people pharmaceuticals that try to increase the blood circulation so that the joints can start to move again. But doing these practices like Eight Brocades and Tai Chi Chuan, Qigong, you are increasing your blood circulation so the incidence of arthritis does not come about. So this whole subject, it's quite extensive when you start really thinking about the benefits and the kind of structure of what is happening here. Now, even when we start talking about, when you get very focused within your exercises, whether it's Tai Chi again or whatever, Eight Brocades, you start producing rare hormones that come out of the center of your brain, out of the hypothalamus. And these also give us a whole new sense of awareness and body function, this kind of vitality that you didn't experience, you experienced this when you were young, but as you age, you lose the ability to sense them. I always looked at Taoism as the great observer. One of the things it did that I think is really unique is that it observed us from the time we were an infant till the time we die. And let me just go over this quickly with you, but when you come out of your mother's womb, you are at your peak of health. Your skin is warm, your saliva is flowing freely, your eyes are bright, etc., etc. And then we start to age. And as we age, we start losing some of the vitalities. But when we're adolescents, our sexual energy is still strong, even though we may not even be aware of sexual functions. The Jing is really strong, and our blood flow is good, etc., etc. And then we start hitting, our teenage years, and then we start dissipating, and we start losing some energy. Not enough that we really notice it, but it is occurring. And then we become young adults, and then we got to start dealing with the world, the anxieties and the perplexities of it. And as we do this, from this infant stage up until what I just talked about, our chi is starting to rise out of our dantian up into our body. Because originally, as an infant, your breath is directly in your dantian. Just watch an infant sleeping in its crib, and you'll see its whole little body breathing. And you'll see it all being centered right from their lower abdomen. But you can see the breath in their little fingertips. Their whole body is breathing. But then we start to lose that. And as we go through life, and start dealing with, relationships, dealing with jobs, occupations, taxes, teachers, all sorts of things, our breath starts to rise up into our body. So that by the time we're 35 or 40, most people's breath is actually in their solar plexus. It's no longer in their lower dantian. And then as we start to age, when we get into our 60s, most people, the breath starts going up into the lungs. And this has, there's two different effects that you can see from this. Is one, like in men, and I'm talking generally here, because some people have different yin and yang natures to their body. But generally speaking, men wanting to be tough guys and masculine have been bringing their chi up into their chest their whole life. It's kind of the macho kind of look that you, that you could see. And in women, first of all, in men, we're trapping our breath in our upper chest, in the front of the body. And that's why you get this kind of look like, the top of the body is top heavy. And men start losing their central equilibrium. They walk kind of funny because they are top heavy. In women, because they trap the air in their upper back of the body and the lungs, they start developing these different spinal problems where they get all hunched over. Now, the other aspect of this is when we die, and I've seen this 3 times, so I know it's true, the breath finally reaches the throat. And our last, act of breathing is we're trying to get some breath into our body. And then we pass away. I've seen this 3 times. It's, this kind of gasping for the last breaths. So Taoism was looking at this kind of observing, and realized this wasn't rocket science. You just have to keep getting your breath back into your Dantian where it was when you were at your best. So this whole idea of, keeping your breath low in your abdomen is a very wise thing, because that's where your health was at its best. So looking at that story, if I wanted to go in and just, deserves a whole book actually, but the idea is, the kind of the initial part was keeping the fluids in our body intact, and then keeping our breath low in our body. And then we can have good health. So, and just so everybody understands, I'm going to get to internal alchemy here pretty soon. But I wanted to cover all these as best I could, these subjects of, what these different energies are. Kind of moving on here with the idea of the component, the medicine called qi, which is probably, one of the main, when you go out to buy a book on these things, you're always looking for that word qi. You're rarely looking for the word jing. But without jing, qi is not really that potent. We all have qi, but to get it to move into our body and have it become something powerful, that's another subject. And here's one way of looking at it for everybody, is there's 2 characters in Chinese for qi, actually. The first one is really not so common. They don't use it that much. But what it does is it shows the upper radical is wu, meaning empty, nothing, formless. And below that are the radical for fire, for heat. So you can translate that as kind of formless heat. But it is pronounced the same as the other character used for qi, which shows a piece of rice within a pot, obviously cooking rice, and then the vapors coming off of that, the character shows these 3 vapors coming off the top. That's what they mean by qi. We can look at that as, like almost steam coming off of a pot. And we know that if we harness steam correctly, it becomes very powerful. It can run a locomotive. But aside from that, when we are first dealing with all these Asian arts, what we really need to get an understanding of is what they mean by Weidan, external elixir, and what they mean by Neidan, internal elixir. Now, Weidan includes, let's just so you get this clear, this includes acupuncture. So when we go to an acupuncturist, they are trying to stimulate our qi centers, our external qi meridians. And these, when we do that, we can heal certain things in the body. Acupuncture is very good. And I'm not going to go into it fully here, but and I doubt that I'll pronounce this correctly, but they made the discovery of this new organ in the body called the interstitium, which is this very thin layer of water in our body, which is right beneath the skin, which is where the acupuncture needles go. Anyway, Western science is now saying they're starting to figure out why acupuncture works. And that's because of this kind of new organ that is this watery element that would allow, the stimulation of these chi centers. That's another story. I think it's a great discovery, and I hope everybody looks into it. We have a whole thing on our website about it. But let's get back to what Taoism was talking about. And that is, there is a difference between Wei Dan and Nei Dan. Wei Dan, external elixir, is where you start, when you practice, you start feeling sensations of heat. You start feeling like tingling sensations in your fingertips, in your extremities. This is Wei Dan. Those effects are just, you can do Tai Chi or you can do acupuncture, and you can get those effects initially. And they're identical. And that's what's telling you what you're experiencing is Wei Dan. Jumping a little bit ahead here, but the difference is in Nei Dan is that you're starting to feel this watery element, the steam, this fluid movement within your meridians. And one of the problems with this is in acupuncture, they named the 12 basic meridians of the body. And those are what, and there's like 360 acupoints on the body. And this is what acupuncture is dealing with. Now, when you get to internal alchemy, you're dealing with what they call 8 extraordinary meridians. Now, unfortunately, they share the same names sometimes, like Renmo and Dumo, but they're not the same. In acupuncture, yes, you have a Renmo and Dumo meridians. And yes, acupuncturists can stimulate points along that and get some sensation of heat within them for you, etc. But Nei Dan, the internal elixir, is much different. Even though it may run by the same name, its effects are different. So let me try to illustrate something here. When you talk about your internal meridians, to give you an example, these are like dry riverbeds, meaning there's nothing in them. They're just sitting there empty. It is through this cultivation of our body fluids, the element, and through our breath, the heating element, we start getting this rush of what we would feel like a watery element. Very similar in nature when it rains or snows in the mountains and that snow melts and that water comes rushing down and starts filling all these dry riverbeds. That's what internal alchemy is. So most of us go through our whole life and never feel this sensation. We never feel this, what Taoists called the elixir. Now keep in mind, elixir in and of itself is a term that implies fluid. So this idea of filling our body with this new formed fluid, which is no more than the combination of Qing and Qi together, we get a whole new sensation in our body about, from our cultivation. So initially, all your sensations are basically based on Wei Dan, which is very good. I'm not here to say that that's not, progress. It is, because it leads to Nei Dan. But the idea is, just because you experience heat does not mean you've experienced the elixir. The elixir is a completely different thing. And these meridians are completely different. Even though they may go by the same names and be in the same areas, they are different. And the actual sensations of them are different. So when we are dealing with all this, cultivation stuff, one of the most important aspects is our breath. And I want to explain this before you get into the practice. Basically Taoism has 9 breathing methods. And the 2 most important, Eight Brocades deals with several of them, but the 2 most important is you got to make your decision whether you're going to be using embryonic breathing or whether you're going to be using natural breathing. Let me kind of explain just a little bit about that. When you were in your mother's womb, you were exclusively doing embryonic breathing, hence the name. Meaning you were drawing in your abdomen and then expanding your abdomen on the exhale. And the reason for this was because of the umbilical cord, and when you're inhaling, you're drawing in all the nutrients, etc., through the umbilical cord into our body, and when we're exhaling, we are expelling it through that. When we are born and we come out of our mother's womb and we take our first gasp for breath, we are now starting to do natural breathing, which is where we fill our abdomen with air, and then when we exhale, we contract it. That's the 2 differences between natural and embryonic breathing. Now, both in your cultivation will become important. And I don't want to jump too far ahead here, but later in life, after you've experienced the elixir, you'll revert to natural breathing. But that's another subject, not for today. But the idea here is, and like Go Hong, the great Taoist of the 2nd century, said that if you want to achieve immortality, then you have to practice embryonic breathing. And I agree with that this initial practice that you're doing, you should be performing embryonic breathing. It's going to produce qi faster in your body than natural breathing will. And it also, I have a book called Embryonic Breathing. I hope everybody reads, because there's many details of this, that people really need to understand about that particular type of breathing, and how you get to, your inhalation is bringing air into your lungs, and then it's all being restored back into the dantian, the lower elixir field. And this is crucial. So I hope everybody pays some attention to that. Even though I know when you're first learning Eight Brocade movements, your mind is more focused on, am I doing this correctly, and not on your breath. But then again, you want your breath to become natural. You put too much attention on your breath and it becomes pensive. If you kind of can relax with it and develop with it over time, it becomes very easy and natural to perform the different breathing methods. Eight Brocades also makes use of holding the breath, which is kind of interesting that, when I first learned this, National taught me to hold my breath when I was rubbing my palms together, etc. And it reminded me of when I was a little kid, an adolescent. Me and my friends, we would do this little, what I now call a little parlor trick, but a couple of them, and I'll explain them, is we'd stand in a doorway and press our palms really hard against the sides of the door jambs, and then we'd release in an instant, and our arms would just float straight up over our head. It was, at that age, that was magic. We couldn't believe our arms would just float up. Well, this is the blood and qi rushing back into our limbs after we had been closing it off through this strenuous pushing against the door jambs. We also used to do a thing where we would make a fist and we would rub our hands really hard. And then we'd open up real quick and then like pulling. You could feel, we used to think we were pulling veins out of the palms of our hands. But this is just another reaction of qi in our body. It's a way of feeling it. So actually, people that do Tai Chi, your arms are supposed to be floating, just like that experience I talked about. It's not external muscular force. It's completely qi. But let's backtrack here a little bit again and talk about more on this idea of internal alchemy. Now, one of the things that's occurring, and we've talked about it, there's this whole thing of cultivating the water element, Jing, in our body, and then this idea of cultivating the fire element, which is our breath, our qi. When those two unite, we can now experience Shan. This is when we have this sensation of this fluid, this steam going through our body. We are now experiencing and will experience this kind of heightened awareness called Shan. And this is critical to internal alchemy because we can cultivate our Qing, we can cultivate our Qi, but it is Shan that unites them. Meaning, the first stage of that is we are learning to focus. This really sounds oversimplified, but it's actually the truth of the matter. Is that when we can really be one-pointed, just like when you first feel this fluid coming into your body, all your attention goes to it. All the other things in your life, the car you want and, family problems, all that stuff just gets wiped out because we focus completely on this elixir, on the sensation of fluids in our body. And this is when our spirit starts to wake up and our consciousness becomes quite focused and full. So one of the things that needs some explanation here is that you can, in your studies, I'm assuming that everybody here is in this class that has also studied some Buddhism, some Taoism, etc. And within that, you're going to hear this phrase, first in the body, then in the mind, or first in the mind, then in the body. And this has been kind of the dividing line or the fork in the road, so to speak, between Taoism and Buddhism. Now, Taoism believes adamantly that it is first in the body and then in the mind. And that's just what we've been talking about here. The Jing is the body, the Qi, and then when they unite, we end up with the Shan, our spirit. So that is first in the body, then in the mind. Now you can take certain, like Chan Buddhism, that you can look at it from the standpoint of first in the mind. Because you go to a Zen center and you're sitting. You're not, doing these exercises, these things to enhance the body, the Jing and the Qi. And through that, once you reach what they call Bodhi or enlightenment, and then these things kind of penetrate into the body. Now, to help clarify this, I know that when I was living at City of 10,000 Buddhas and we went through a Chan session, there were many questions that came up from monks and nuns to the teacher Shuanghua that were really internal alchemy related. They would talk about this heat in their body and, you know, fluid sensations. So by practicing Chan or Zen, you can, by almost accident, experience the effects of internal alchemy. Taoism doesn't want it to be an accident. It wants to be a purposeful endeavor, so to speak. So Taoism is basically and primarily this idea first in the body, then in the mind. Whereas Buddhism can be first in the mind and then in the body. Now, both methods, you know, my teacher once explained that, you know, if you take the three teachings of China, Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism, there's a story that kind of explains this. And the story goes that the Confucians sit at the bottom of a mountain and look up and realize that the top of that mountain is the goal. But they're not going to make any efforts to go up to the top of that mountain. They're going to stay at the bottom and just do what they think is propriety, righteousness, etc. They're just going to deal with their existence at the bottom of that mountain, even though they understand that it is the peak of the mountain that they want to get to. Taoists look at it from the standpoint of they want to get to the top of the mountain, but they also they go up taking paths of least resistance. Because, and if you look at the Chan Buddhist says, I want to get to the top of that mountain. And so they start clawing and grasping their way, whatever they can get their hands on, and try to climb up to the top of the mountain. Now the problem with that is most fail. Most fall off and quit. You can see this. I mean, I've been around for quite a while, and I've seen, like in Zen centers, you can see, there'll be this wave of people for a while who really get into it, but then after a few months, they disappear. Because the practice is difficult. Zen is not easy. It's not difficult either, but for the most part, when people's perception of it is that it's very difficult. And this is, kind of the story my teacher is related to me, is that Taoism in and of itself is, not that difficult. You just have to be more patient with it, because you are going to the same place that, Buddhism talks about, but you're going up, as I said, through this path of least resistance, that you are making use of things that Lao Tzu talked about, non-action, active non-action, these statements, push the boat, drift with the current. There's all these different, and we'll explain those as we go through the course here. But, so there's this unique thing happening here with Eight Brocades, since that's the focus of this course. And one of the most unique things I think about it is a lot of the movements that you will be learning and doing are basically things you did in your mother's womb. These kind of things. Sonograms can show that, you do all the stretching of the legs, et cetera, are things that you did in that state. So to kind of congeal that thought for you, Taoism, if it's anything, when it comes to these practices of internal alchemy and health, longevity, is about returning. It's never about going forward. You're trying to get back to these states of energy that you had when you were young, and to imitate things that you did when you were young so your body can recall them and it reacts to them. So by keeping our breath low and by doing certain movements and producing saliva, having our breath low in our, all these are things we did when we were infants and adolescents. So Taoism is trying to bring us back to this state, these energies that we had when we were young. Now, I'm not sitting here proposing that we change and we go back and we all become little teenagers again. No, that's, when you think of immortality in the Asian mind, Confucianism, because they want to keep having sons and etc., they are dealing with what's called biological immortality. It's through a bloodline. When you start talking about, then you get up into Taoism. Yes, there are schools that thought that talk about perpetual youth. I don't know. I've never met anybody that looked like a teenager and was 800 years old. I haven't encountered that. I'm not saying it could happen. Just, we know that from the idea that there's a thing called jellyfish that are actually immortal. There's no science has proved it. They're immortal. And my opinion is they're immortal unless we step on them or eat them. But the idea is they regenerate. They age and then regenerate. They keep doing it over and over again. In fact, it was one of my great surprises when I was first, one of the things I translated a lot of, I like Chan Sun Fang, 1,200 years ago, basically. And in one of the texts at the very end, he said, well, this is nothing more, he was talking about internal alchemy. He said, this is nothing more than the jellyfish method. I never knew precisely what that statement meant when I translated it. It wasn't until years later, all of a sudden now you're hearing about these different species of jellyfish that are immortal. And they have a process that they go through, that line became clear. My problem is this was discovered about 10 years ago, I think, in Western science. And Chan Sun Feng's talking about it 1,200 years ago. So that led to some perplexities in my mind. How did they know? So, but moving on here is that Taoism also has this idea of immortality in the sense that if you live to be over 100 years old, you are what they call an earthly immortal. But the main idea of immortality in Taoism is directed at immortalization of your spirit, so that when you die, you have clarity. Practicing Eight Brocades, Tai Chi Chuan, all these meditation, all these things are generally focused on that idea that at your time of death, you die with clarity, not with fear and confusion, but with absolute clarity so that you can go to where you want to go. I like that idea, obviously, but when we're looking at this, because this Eight Brocades is focused on health and longevity, and to kind of sum this up for everybody is we all need to be healthy, and that should be the first goal. We can't look at this from the standpoint, oh, I do Eight Brocades, so I'm going to live 250 years like Lu Chen Yuan. No, you're not. You better be honest. Your life is not, you cannot recreate. Here's a guy that He's 13 years old, goes in the mountains, collects herbs, eats organic, drinking mountain water, fresh air, never had pharmaceuticals, never went to the hospital, lived in nature, free of stress, etc., etc. Well, of course, his ability for longevity was much greater than we who live in cities and deal with jobs, and etc., etc. There's a big difference there. But that's not the point of it. I do not teach these things and saying, oh yeah, you'll be 250 years old. I am hoping that you practice these things to be healthy. Now, longevity is another matter. And my statement about that is don't worry about longevity. That happens later. You can't know about that now, but you can know about your health now. So when we look at these practices, sometimes there's the illusion that, oh, if I practice these things, I'm going to live a long time. Maybe yes, maybe no. But the idea is you can live healthier. Like my teacher was supposed to die at age 45. He was diagnosed with 2 months to live. But then he ended up living to 102. He directly stated that that was, from practicing these things. Now, I can take that from the other side. My grandfather on my father's side, he lived to be 98 years old and never practiced any of this stuff. Yes, he was a farmer, so he pretty much ate organic and blah, blah, but in the same token, I can't guarantee myself that because my grandfather lived to be 98 and didn't pay attention to these things, that I could do the same. It's not true. All my grandfather's sons and daughters died early. They didn't live a long time. So he had what they call good before having chi, a chi that he inherited at birth. We all get it. We are, we get different levels of it. So these practices, and I want to make this clear, because I talked to several people who were dying. Not a pleasant thing, but everybody wished they had another day. That may not mean much to you now, but it'll mean a lot to you at point of death, where you just want more time. And that's what these practices are really about. I don't know that anybody in this class is going to live to be 50 or 150. What I do know is that these practices can give you a quality of life, a sense of health. From my own experience, when I was 38 years old, I was hit by a train. Fortunately, I'd been studying with TT for about 6 years when that happened. And I can honestly say that if it was not for all the things he taught me, I would either be dead or crippled. And it was because of these practices, these Eight Brocades, this Tai Chi Chuan meditation, that I know that I got through those things far easier than most would have. And this is something we all need to look at. I'm not, when you start thinking about doing these practices, especially Eight Brocades leading into internal alchemy. Yes, the hope is, and this is why Taoism taught it, is that you would live longer so you'd have more time to experience immortality, pure and simple. But in the meantime, you'd be healthy. And it's that, and I'll close this with the idea of old Chinese saying, may you have youthfulness within old age. Because that's really what we want. With the wisdom that we acquire, the knowledge we acquire throughout our life, to live healthy and long, we get, we live a much better life. It's Will Rogers correctly stated, youth. Such a shame they wasted on the young. There's some truth to that, because when we're young, we have no consciousness of it whatsoever. We don't know what we're dissipating, what we're losing. But when we get older, if we have health in our old age, life is beautiful, as my teacher would say. You know, and it gives us a whole new way of living. Because there's not, who wants to live to be 100 and be sick? You know, that doesn't make any sense. If we can live to be 100 and healthy, that's something. That's something better. And health is, as my teacher said, of the utmost importance. Everything else is secondary. So yeah, there's this accentuation on longevity, but I don't pay too much attention to it. How could I? I don't know when I will pass. So, but I do know about my health. And I know that the different health problems that I have suffered were all much easier for me to deal with because of these things that I did learn. And that, I think that is important. You know, I think that the quality of life is more important than the quantity of it. But again, we would all like to live a long time. So we should do things that can help promote that. That's not rocket science, that's common sense. So we should take care of ourselves. As Lao Tzu said in the Tao Te Ching, do nothing that harms the body. Translation, do nothing that harms your Jing. So, with all of that said, I will open up to anybody that has any questions.
And also, I just want to say that we'll do questions on this segment, and then we'll come back and we're going to go through the Li Ching Yuan, walking like a crane, sleeping like a deer, and sitting like a tortoise before we talk about the 8 brocades. So it'll be part of the second component of the class. So let's just focus on these topics for now. So that anybody has any questions?
Yeah.
You can just, Patrick will.
Or you'll all bless me with a break. So, or you guys can think about your questions, you know, and write them down for another time, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Oh, I want to also say something.
Yes.
In the class portal, we have, you know, comment areas for everything, so people can write their questions in the class portal too. That way everyone who goes to the class portal will see the questions and our responses.
Okay. All right, why don't we do this? Why don't we just take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and I'll talk about what some of the ideas that's going on with the 2 exercises that everybody will be doing within the Eight Brocades section. Okay?
Yeah, and then people can ask questions then if you think of a question on the break, and Stuart will talk about those 3 longevity methods of walking like a crane and those ones. So, okay, great.
All right, we'll take a break. I shall see you shortly. No more than 10 minutes, somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. Okay?